I was manipulated and betrayed by my own sister, but I came back. My name is Olivia. I'm 34 years old, and I never imagined my own family could make me feel so alone. I grew up as the older sister, always trying to do everything right, helping, caring, but it seemed like nothing was enough. My sister Natalie always had a way of getting what she wanted, often at my expense, and for a long time I swallowed every injustice, every silent manipulation. On the outside, I smiled, pretending everything was fine, but inside I was a whirlwind of feelings: sadness, frustration, anger, fear. I began to feel invisible, undervalued, as if everything I did was insufficient. One day, when I realized my own savings and efforts were being used by her to benefit herself, I felt my world crumble. It was at that moment that I realized I could no longer remain silent and needed to face everything head-on. I'd always been responsible, organized, and determined, but this seemed to make Natalie a target. She had a way of manipulating situations, taking advantage of my goodwill, and turning my efforts into her own achievements. I remember entire nights crying alone, trying to understand what was happening. I couldn't sleep well. My heart ached. My mind kept replaying every situation where I'd been wronged, every cruel word she'd said in disguise. It was a constant drain, like living under a shadow you can't shake. Every time I tried to speak up, explain, or assert myself, I was labeled as overreacting or oversensitive. This undermined me, made me question my own sanity, and for a long time I thought I was wrong for feeling pain. The turning point came on a seemingly ordinary day, but it changed everything. I was taking care of some family financial matters when I realized Natalie had abused my trust and deceived me in a way that left me vulnerable. My heart raced. I felt anger and despair, but also a lump in my throat and tears I couldn't hold back. For the first time, I understood that I could no longer remain passive. I had been patient, tolerant, and caring, but this was being exploited, and my life was being jeopardized. It was at that moment that I realized I needed to fight for myself, not for revenge, but for emotional survival and dignity. I decided I would no longer let my life be controlled by someone who didn't care about me. In the following days, the feeling of helplessness consumed me, but it also brought me clarity. I knew I needed help, so I sought therapy to understand my emotions, to learn how to set boundaries and protect myself without feeling guilty. It was difficult to admit that I needed support, but it was the first conscious choice I made for myself. Each session showed me that my pain was real and valid, that I wasn't exaggerating, and that I deserved respect and self-love. Little by little, I realized that I didn't have to carry the weight of manipulation alone, that it was possible to rebuild my life and self-esteem even after being wronged by someone so close. It was a painful and slow process, but essential. I began writing down my feelings, recording every situation in which I had been harmed, and, most importantly, identifying patterns of manipulation so as not to repeat them in the future. I discovered that recognizing that you were a victim is not a weakness, but a strength. I cried alone, yes, but I also began to feel a growing desire to bounce back. I realized that my pain could be transformed into learning and that I no longer needed to allow anyone to diminish me. This was the beginning of my transformation, the first step toward reconnecting with myself and realizing that I had power over my own life. Over time, I realized I needed to take concrete action to change my life, not just complain or wallow in sadness. I started by setting clear boundaries with Natalie, even though it was painful. I could no longer allow my goodwill to be used against me. Every decision I made seemed small, but it was powerful. Denying abusive requests, not giving in to manipulation, saying no without fear. It was scary at first because part of me was afraid of her reaction, afraid of losing what little connection we still had. But each no I said gave me a little more strength, reminded me that my life didn't have to revolve around what she wanted or needed. I started truly investing in myself, taking courses, reading, exercising, new routines, anything that strengthened my mind and body. I learned to appreciate small achievements, things that previously seemed insignificant. A simple guilt-free lunch alone, or finishing a personal project, gave me a sense of independence and power I'd never felt before. Gradually, I realized that true self-improvement didn't come from revenge or comparison, but from focusing on my own life, on my own growth. Every step I took moved me away from my sister's shadow and closer to my own emotional freedom. Therapy was essential in this process. It taught me not to carry all the blame for what happened, but also to recognize my limits and traumas. I learned that feeling pain is normal, that anger doesn't need to be hidden, and that forgiving yourself is the first step to rebuilding your life. Each session made me reflect, how can I use this pain to grow? How can I transform the injustice I experienced into motivation to build something better? That's when the idea of rebuilding began to materialize, not as an empty promise, but as something that required effort, discipline, and courage every day. One of the most memorable experiences was when I decided to open up to a close friend about everything. Speaking out loud, without hiding anything, was liberating. I shared how I felt deceived, manipulated, and invisible, and she listened without judgment. For the first time, I felt my pain recognized and validated. It was a moment of catharsis. I could feel my strength growing alongside my vulnerability. I realized I didn't have to carry everything alone, and that admitting my pain didn't diminish my worth. On the contrary, it made me more human, more real, more resilient. I began making practical decisions to ensure my well-being. I reorganized my finances, sought emotional independence, and clearly defined my physical and mental space. Each choice reminded me that my life no longer needed to be shaped by my sister's behavior. Little by little, I began to feel confident in myself, a sense that I could live without fear and without needing to prove anything to anyone. The transformation wasn't immediate, but I could already notice small daily victories. Sleeping peacefully, smiling without guilt, feeling proud of my achievements, even the simplest ones. Life was beginning to have color again, and I finally felt I could stand up for myself, without relying on anyone to validate my pain or my overcoming. One day, I found myself reflecting on everything I'd been through, and realized that anger and sadness no longer needed to rule my life. I still remembered my sister's manipulations, the cruel words, the feeling of helplessness, but now I could face everything with clarity. I felt that, for the first time, I wasn't a passive victim. I was the protagonist of my own story. I began to ask myself, what can I do to be happy, regardless of it? That's when I understood that overcoming grief isn't about forgetting the past, but learning from it and using it as fuel for one's life. I decided to get involved in projects that made me feel useful and alive. I started volunteering, helping women who had experienced emotional abuse or family manipulation. Every story I heard reminded me of myself, and it strengthened me. Feeling that I could transform my pain into something positive for others was liberating. I understood that what happened to me didn't have to be my end. It could be a starting point to help, inspire, and motivate. My life began to gain purpose and meaning in a way I had never imagined. I also began reconnecting with old friends and creating new relationships based on respect and trust. Before, I isolated myself, fearing being used or betrayed. But little by little, I realized I didn't need to be afraid to live. Every smile, every sincere conversation, every peaceful encounter showed me that happiness was available, even after so much suffering. I learned to appreciate the small moments, to feel gratitude for what I achieved day by day. This internal shift was crucial for me to no longer be trapped in the past and the manipulation I suffered. One day, I found the courage to look at my sister without immediate resentment. It wasn't easy. My heart still ached, and memories of injustices lingered. But I realized that I no longer needed to be defined by her behavior. I could exist fully, regardless of what she did or didn't do. That was one of the most liberating moments of my life. I realized that true victory isn't about doing justice or being right, but about rebuilding yourself and choosing to live with integrity and peace, even after being wronged. As the months passed, I felt a real transformation. I was more confident, lighter, and my mind was no longer occupied with resentment. I learned to deal with difficult emotions without being controlled by them. Every conscious choice I made, taking care of myself, saying no, investing in myself, reinforced my strength and resilience. Finally, I was able to look at the past without feeling trapped by it and began to truly believe that I deserved a life full of fulfillment, self-love, and genuine happiness. What had seemed impossible months ago was now a tangible reality. I was becoming the best version of myself. There was a day I'll never forget when I realized I was finally free from depending on my sister's approval or anyone else's opinion. I was home alone, drinking coffee, and I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. It wasn't just silence, it was a sense of control over my own life. For the first time, I could decide my own course of action without fear of retaliation. without needing to please or protect my image in front of those who had hurt me. It was in that moment that I understood. True emotional freedom doesn't come from running away from problems, but from embracing the power we have over ourselves. There were still days of relapse, when painful memories surfaced and my heart tightened. But instead of letting myself be consumed by anger, I began to channel those emotions into something positive. I joined the gym, ran, lifted weights, and challenged myself physically and mentally. I discovered that my body could be an ally, a tool for releasing tension and transforming pain into strength. Each workout became a reminder that I could rise again, that I could overcome limits and reconnect with my inner energy. The transformation was happening from the inside out. I also decided to invest in my career and personal projects that I'd previously neglected. I learned new skills, took online courses, and reconnected with what had always brought me joy and purpose. Each small achievement reminded me that I was capable of building something solid and real, regardless of any adversity. The past was still there, but it no longer had the power to define me. I realized that overcoming isn't about erasing history. It's about writing new, stronger chapters with courage and determination. Over time, I began to allow myself moments of genuine happiness. Outings with friends, short walks alone, unexpected laughter. Every simple gesture became symbolic of my evolution. I learned that life doesn't have to be perfect to be fulfilling. I discovered that true overcoming comes from appreciating the present, celebrating small victories, and not dwelling on what we can't control. This gave me a sense of lightness I hadn't felt since adolescence, and I realized I was building a solid foundation for my own peace. The greatest lesson I learned from all of this is that our lives don't have to be defined by the mistakes or injustices we suffer. I still carried scars, but they no longer paralyzed me. Every challenge, every manipulation I faced, became a learning experience and fueled me to become stronger. Today, I can look back on my story and feel proud. Despite being wronged and underestimated, I managed to rise up, rebuild my self-esteem, and create a life full of purpose, happiness, and emotional freedom. I found my strength, and no one can take that strength away. One of the most defining moments was when I realized I no longer needed to rely on external validation to feel strong. Before, every move my sister made shook me. Every comparison made me feel insecure. But that day, alone at home, I felt a confidence I'd never felt before. It was as if I'd finally stepped out of the shadows and was whole, complete with myself. No matter what Natalie did or didn't do, I knew my happiness was in my hands. This realization was liberating and made me feel capable of facing any challenge with serenity. From then on, I began taking even more concrete steps toward my own life. I reorganized my finances, focused on personal and professional projects, and began prioritizing my well-being without guilt. Each conscious decision I made strengthened me and reinforced my sense of autonomy. I discovered hobbies that brought me pleasure, people who valued me, and experiences that made me feel alive. Little by little, I realized that my life was changing. Not by chance, but by my determination to rebuild everything that had been shaken. The most incredible impact was realizing how my mindset changed. Before, I was constantly at the mercy of negative feelings, reliving injustices and resentments. Today, I can face difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. I learned to identify patterns of manipulation, protect my energy, and cultivate healthy relationships. Each challenge I faced taught me more about resilience, courage, and self-love. I didn't expect this to be possible, but feeling this internal shift gave me a strength that no adversity could take away. Today, when I look back, I see not only the pain I experienced, but the woman I've become. A woman who learned to stand up for herself, who found her own voice, who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. My story isn't perfect, but it's true, and within it lies a path of overcoming that inspires me every day. I can look to the past with acceptance and to the future with hope. Every obstacle, every injustice I suffered served to shape me, strengthen me, and teach me to value my own life. Even though I was wronged, manipulated, and underestimated, I managed to rise up. I managed to transform pain into learning, sadness into motivation, and injustice into strength. Today, I live consciously, happily, confidently, and resiliently. I know there are still challenges, but now I face them with courage and poise. If I could overcome all this, anyone can too. Believe in yourself, value your strength, and know that even in the worst moments, there is always a way to start over and shine. Each day, I've learned to value my own time and energy. Before, I wasted energy trying to please, explain, or fix things that weren't my responsibility. Today, I know that my priority is myself. I set clear boundaries, choose relationships that build me up, and allow myself to invest in dreams that once seemed impossible. This awareness has transformed my life. Each morning now begins with a sense of purpose, and each small daily victory, a completed project, a moment of joy, a firm decision, becomes fuel for continued growth. The most incredible thing is realizing that the strength I needed was always within me. For years, I sought external recognition, tried to make my family see my worth, but what truly freed me was believing in myself. I learned to listen to my own voice, trust my instincts, and value myself without depending on anyone's approval. Every challenge I faced taught me resilience, courage, and patience. Today, I see every difficulty that arises as an opportunity for growth, not a reason to knock myself down. I've also realized that sharing my story with others is powerful. By sharing my journey, I've inspired women and men facing manipulation, injustice, or family betrayal to not give up. I feel like my pain has become a beacon, showing that it's possible to rise up, even when all seems lost. Every message of gratitude I receive reinforces my conviction. Overcoming adversity is not only possible, it's contagious, and it can transform lives beyond your own. Today, I look to the future with confidence, hope, and determination. I know there will still be challenges, but now I know I can face them with courage and poise. The pain of the past no longer defines me. It strengthens me. Every decision I make, every achievement I celebrate, every step I take is proof that I am capable of building a full, healthy, and happy life. My story is living proof that, even in the darkest moments, it is possible to rise up, reconnect with yourself, and live a life full of purpose and inner strength.